I was born in Kobe, Japan, and
Okay.
that's where I grew up, and up until junior high school. And I came to New York since high school because my father is international business, and my family was stationed in New York, so I came with my father to
Okay.
go to high school in New York, and thus I
Oh,
never left.
we have to talk about that transition because, I feel like going from Japan to New York City or vice versa would be a really big shock. And in particular at that time for New York, for high school, what was that like?
It was wild because first I went to Fieldstone summer school, and it's like a late 60s and it's radical. And some of the reading we did, first reading was James Baldwin.
Oh,
And then we had to see two movies in comparison, Battleship Potemkin and Birth of Nation,
hmm.
and talk about this as analysis, like for uh, a high school girl who really doesn't speak English. And we also had to read Rosemary's Baby and then watch the movie too because it's supposed to be the most accurate transition between the book
Hmm.
and the movie. So it has this intellectual content, but the actual story is very scary.
Well, I mean, did you speak English before you came over?
No, no, not at all. So
Wow.
this was a summer school to learn English, and that's
Oh
how I
my.
learned English.
Oh
Right.
my
Right.
And
goodness.
and my teaching assistants, my tutors were like really great. One guy was like out and out Black Panther with big afro and African clothes. Another one was a religion major from Yale, total hippie, intellectual. So two of them will just take me to places, and so I learned uh, immediately what it's like, the culture and issues and social issues that everybody's confronting late 60s.
Was
I
it
mean, it's like a confrontational politic time,
right?
really.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, for sure. So where in New York City did you guys move to?
to Riverdale, which is north of Manhattan,
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha.
and then Fieldstone was like a walking distance from my home. So
I see.
it was great school, but it didn't last long.
Well, for one summer, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, was it scary making that move? I mean, I guess there's a lot of exciting things happening, which would make the experience fun and educational and entertaining and all that. But I mean, it's New York can be a kind of aggressive place.
Yeah, but for young people, yes, good thing about adjusting to a different culture, young age is one is curious
Mm,
and one is fearless. So one can go and absorb a little stuff, and so there's no idea that I didn't think it was scary place.
huh.
And I was full of curiosity, absorbing the city's sound and I loved going to museums. So every Saturday I would go to a museum or not, and
Gotcha.
that's my Saturday. So it was incredible place for young people to grow up, and it's accessible city for young kids because you can go everywhere with subway or bus and
Yeah.
walk. You don't need a car to drive you around. So
That's crazy.
That's pretty wide. I mean, moving to another country and learning the language, it's in such a short time. Like, I moved to New York about 10 years ago and I studied English for many, many years and it was difficult still. So I can't imagine. I mean, that's
yeah,
impressive.
and no, but kids just young people just
Yeah.
jump right in. I
Yeah.
think by end of year and a half, I was okay. I was used to it, made friends, but I miss a lot of my friends in Japan. That's probably the hardest thing. The
Yeah.
Sure.
kids I grew up with, and I think having to say goodbye to them was probably the most difficult thing for me.
Yeah. And there wasn't any iPhone back then.
No, no, just writing letters and
Yeah.
waiting forever to receive letters back, which
Yeah.
was very quaint.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. So you did a high school in New York.
Yeah.
Um, and then did you get your bachelor's of architecture right after at Cooper Union, or was
Yes,
you did?
yes.
So how
Mhm.
did you decide to apply to that school? How did you decide architecture?
Well, So after Fieldstone, my bucolic best summer in my high school memory, it was too radical. So my father sent me to girls' Catholic school,
Okay.
Oh God.
Yeah, that's a little bit different.
studying with nuns. And then I always drew, but there's no art curriculum, and I was really suffering. And my father took a pity on me, and he sent me to summer classes in Europe, to actually Paris
Oh
and
wow.
Oh.
to Florence. And then I was taking French then at high school, because it's like everybody starts new
Yeah.
with foreign languages. So, and I could speak a little French. And then I learned Italian, and I took courses. And in Florence, uh, the classes I took was a professor, an architect who studied at Cooper Union. And he taught Renaissance art history
Hmm.
and also architectural history, as well as going around cities. And then he said that perhaps I should look into Cooper Union, and recommended me to go see the dean and think about it. And so in being Florence at young age, then what an incredible thing that's my first exposure to architecture. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it really happened. So,
And
so I
this
owe it to this person, introduction to Cooper Union.
right, and this was you were still in high school when this happened, right? This was like
Right,
the
right.
summer of junior high or
Right,
junior year or
exactly.
something.
Junior, yeah, right, right.
Right.
So it was a college level course that we were able to take, and
Mm-hmm.
then after that, I felt like I have drawings and portfolio as a result of it, and then I kept up with artwork, and it really, I think I came alive. It's like I was wilting flower until then, I guess.
Yeah. But so there wasn't. Did you ever think that maybe you would major in art as opposed to architecture, or something sort of related but not specifically this profession?
Oh, right, right. No, I think I actually applied to art school at Cooper Union first. And
Oh,
Oh.
also another alternative, you might be interested in, was French literature.
Oh wow.
Very interested in philosophy and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
symbolism, uh, poetry. And so, um, and I actually went on to Saint-Malo to study French literature the next summer, Université de Rennes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That
in
seemed very nice.
Brittany. So I had applied for both things, philosophy or French literature, and I ended up entering art school at Cooper Union. And then I transferred after 1 year to architecture.
Oh, I see.
wow! So you actually had an international background, but perspective and experiences from a relatively early time.
I guess by virtue of, yes, the life,
Yeah.
and eventually my parents moved from New York back to Tokyo and back to London, and they kept going around in circles between London, Tokyo, and New York. So it was very complicated.
So you never considered applying to school back in Japan after you came back from Europe?
No, no, no.
You-
And especially I had to follow. So I actually looked at schools in UK because my parents were there.
Okay.
Ah, I see.
So then they came right back to New York. So
That makes
that
sense.
wasn't much of a choice.
I mean, so Cooper Union is also a very specific school, and I don't think we've spoken with someone on the show who went there. Or we might have, maybe we forgot. But so, what was it like at that school?
It's one of the most amazing school, and especially when I went, it was John Haydock was the dean.
Oh,
And
wow.
first year we had Raymond Abraham, we had Peter Eisenman, there was Richard Meyer, there's Charlie Guasmi, Jim Poshek, and then Rick Scofidio was my professor in second year.
Oh, no
Wow.
kidding.
And Liz Dilla was a year behind me. She also started in art school and transferred after a year. And it was amazing. And Danny Libeskin was in my thesis year when I went to first year. So I was so lucky. I was in golden era with people with me and people ahead of me and behind me. So it's an amazing time. And and it's small school.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I convinced my father to let me go is, as you know, it's free school.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know, is it still free? I think they might have
I
changed
think
it.
They changed it.
Yeah,
I'm very
recently.
upset about it.
Yeah.
It just was no need. And it was free, so it was open to all international students, and it's not based upon nationality, race, or religion, or sex. It's just completely merit-based. If you get in, they had engineering school, art school, and architecture school, and it's free.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
So
Yeah.
it has this amazing democratic atmosphere, which, made everybody equal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
it's very important.
I mean, that's a fantastic time to be there. And you described all the different people. I guess I'm trying to recall now. Were they informally labeled the Five Whites? Is that right?
Those are 5 architects. John Haydock,
right.
Richard Meyer, Charlie Guasmi, Peter Eisenman,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's. Oh, and did I say John Haydock?
You
Yeah.
did, yeah. There's one
Yeah,
other.
I did.
I know there's 5 of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a New York 5. They consider.
The
Yeah.
New York 5. That's right.
Yeah.
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 Well, that's incredible. So you're at Cooper Union, and I'm also curious. Did you had some exposure to what architecture was about from your time in Italy, right? And probably from other instances. But when you switched over to architecture at Cooper Union, were you surprised at all by what you were being taught? I don't even know how the program works, if it's more theoretical versus practical, but were you surprised by the nature of the program or what was being covered? Because I feel like a lot of people come in with assumptions and they realize that architecture is typically it's a lot more conceptual than they think it's going to be.
Right, but since the era in which when I entered art school was really conceptual, height of conceptual art. So for somebody transitioning from art to architecture was not such a challenge or differences. And it's very spatial oriented, and we are working on a lot of installations as artists and interactive. And as you can imagine, it's a very lively time in terms of art and performances. And this is also an era in which there is a social unrest, as you can imagine. But that's when art thrives. So the film, music, art, and all that's actually intermingled, and architecture was just part of it. So it's not as if you're going into a different discipline, but more of a focus. And the reason I was more attracted to architecture as opposed to art is that it's a much more synthetic discipline in which one is studying sciences, engineering, and also technical issues, math, as well as philosophical issues and theoretical issues and arts. It's really things that I was very interested in. Like, as I mentioned before, I was interested in French literature and philosophy, which is theoretical based, and art and drawing and artistic expressions. And I also always liked science and math, so I didn't have to choose. I could do everything. So this was like, for a subject of a study, it's much more interesting because art can be can be very isolating because you're really on your own making things. There are group projects, collaborations, but I'm like, if I'm being an artist, I could just work in my studio. There's no reason to go to school, for example.
Right.
So if I'm going to school, it's such a great pedagogical premise that it held for people, younger people who are interested in learning and curious and really, studying. So
I think there's a lot of great points there. I like the one that, if you're interested in a lot of different things that a lot of times are perceived as being almost polar opposites in terms of, let's say, the arts versus the math and sciences, that, architecture, it's capable of kind of absorbing all of that and also capable of being about all those things or being a focus on one of those things. Also, your point about if you're an artist, you're kind of in your studio 24/7 is something we've heard from a lot of artists who are or friends of ours. It's just it's kind of grueling. You're alone and you're producing work over and over and over again, and that's what you have to do.
It is grueling, but it's joyous. It's fun, and you're not forced to do it.
That's true.
And you just, because one thing leads into another thing, there's endless. That's the problem, because we don't know when to stop as an architect. And because you do one, it opens up a door to the, where do you end it? I think that's actually the challenge for a lot of us, and we can keep on working because it's so exciting. It's a lot of fun. So, and I think the atmosphere was like that, and it's not being forced upon by anyone else, but
Yeah.
it was very creative. Cooper Union had a very creative air about it, and also rigorous and highly disciplined, which we needed. And then, like, open to, they had a method of team teaching, which is, it's just one instructor who teaches you studio, but it's several instructors, and they don't necessarily agree, and they get into huge arguments among each other. And for a student, you're presenting, you really have to be strong and work against or with,
Right.
and you have to be nearly equal to each one of them to present your ideas. So it's incredible training.
Yeah.
You saw professors getting into fight among each other. We're like, oh, we're not getting.
Yeah, and you're presenting, Toshiko. What side are you on? Neutral. So we're talking about like mid 70s at this point, something like that.
Late, yeah, early
70s.
Right.
Yeah. That's I mean, that's also, I think listeners have to remember that that's a pretty radical time, as you've been describing, in New York City. When you were living there and at that time, were you part of any of like the movements?
Well, like open house for Cooper Union, when you get accepted, you go there, you show up, and then there's a demonstration going on. They get a bus ready to send the students to Washington, D.C. This trustee paid for the bus for the students and faculty to go down to Washington, D.C. This was Kent State, in which a student got killed by the police. This is before you guys were born, you see. And then one of us architecture students' best friend from high school was the student who got killed, and it's widely publicized, a photograph of him laying down. And I mean, I can say who it is, Ralph Lerner, who used to be the dean of Princeton. That was his best friend from high school. So students' body got very active. And Arthur Houghton, who was a trustee, who was a congressman, is also activist. I saw him like above the Cooper Union's foundation building. There's a small balcony. He was standing there. He was encouraging everyone to go and protest against it. That America cannot be a country of democracy if the police starts to gunning down students. We can't tolerate it. So that's the open house for me.
Okay. Yeah. It's not like most other open houses. That's pretty amazing.
No. It was incredible confrontational politics. It was activists and architecture students organized this committee of rational persuasion, and they will be walking around corridors without shoes on and telling all these administrations, and one of the students actually shut down the electricity. And
was it you?
You had to listen and work with, so all of a sudden, confrontational, but everyone came together.
Yeah,
which was amazing. Both students, it was not, in the end, I think, very challenging that as an entire community, it's beyond, who you are, who you represent. It's the whole community has to protest. We can't have this. So it was interesting.
It seems fair to say that a good portion of the education came from just being in the city at that time.
Oh yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think location of Cooper Union downtown.
Hmm.
On 8th Street, there's Electric Circus, which is incredible disco, which is designed by one of our professors. And there's a Fillmore East, was like a performance. If we wanted to, we could go there after school and come back to do more work at school, or Max's Kansas City. So these are the times in which amazing musicians, artists were working
Yeah.
right in the vicinity, and you see them in action.
Cooper Union at that time, and it's still roughly in the same location as it is now, right? At that
Yes, it's
juncture?
exactly the same. Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. And there's McSorley's. McSorley's?
Oh, right. Oh, my God. McSorley's. I think the first year I got there is the first year the women can go.
Oh,
really?
wow.
Yeah, it was men only. So that was happening. So
Men
Wow.
only. It's kind of weird to think about today.
It's kind
but
of weird for us to think, like the woman couldn't do certain things, like a few years back.
Yeah, it's not that long ago, actually.
I mean, it's not that long ago, but it's
No,
crazy to
no.
think about.
So Cooper Union, right? So at what point did you start your own practice?
And after Cooper Union, I went to work for Edward Larry Barnes
Hmm.
for 5 years.
Okay.
And then after that, I started my own practice.
In New York City. You've always been in New York, right?
Yeah. I've always been in New York City.
So it seems like I think a lot of different people start practices, well, at different times, and certainly some start. I would say that starting a practice after 5 years of experience is on the earlier side, typically. A lot of architects, because it's a profession that takes a while, they'll practice for much longer, and then they have all these connections and whatever else, and then they do their own thing. But you started relatively early, we could say. Was there any hesitation in making that leap? Did you always know that you were going to do your own thing?
Yeah, I thought so too. And then I just have to say, I was lucky because Cooper Union was a free school.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why a lot of people cannot start on their own is financial issues. You owe student loans and so forth. It takes ages to pay off, and you have no choice but to keep working for corporate offices.
Right.
That's a reality which I think is problematic. And so I just have to be honest and say that's actually one of the reasons I was able to. And I'm sure everybody wants to start his or her practice, but there are challenges to that.
I think that's a really good point, actually. That's a really good point, because we often talk about on this show, like the aspirations, the knowledge you have or don't have, but the financial side is real. And it's something that maybe students don't consider because they're students, but when you're 10 years out of school and you still have massive debt, the idea, and now, of course, maybe you want to have kids or I don't know, whatever, right? The idea of starting your own practice is it almost that sometimes feels irresponsible in that sense. So that's a good point.
Yeah,
So you started your own practice. Was there ever a time that you thought, maybe I'll venture off and practice somewhere else at a different place in the United States or abroad or back in Japan? Or was New York always going to be it?
New York will be it. I just basically grew up in it. I knew the city well, and I liked the energy. I knew the people. So I don't have any wishes. And of course, I think these days I have projects elsewhere. I have friends elsewhere, but we still think New York is a base.
Yeah.
Was it difficult back then when you started as a woman and as a foreigner to start a business?
Well, once again, as you mentioned, I started my practice relatively young.
Right.
I think I was barely 30. Then once again, when you were so young, you're like clueless, you're fearless, and you don't think about any of it. I didn't think about me being a foreigner woman, and just jumped right in and just started to do work. And thinking back, if those labels which might be given by outside, if I considered it, I might not have been that brave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right.
So I would just say that to everybody, just forget it. Whatever people try to label you, just throw it away and do whatever you want to do and you like to do. And that
Yeah.
I think that's healthier that way.
Mm.
I'm totally on
Everybody,
board.
yeah, everybody wants to try to prevent you to do things by labeling you and put you into certain small boxes.
A bunch of small boxes. Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think also New York City is like almost a perfect place to have the mentality that you're talking about, because there's so many different types of people there. And there's always a lot of action, even probably the action at that time in the early 70s, or at that point, the 80s, I guess, was, hyper. But there's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of movement, a lot of different people. And that's the one thing I did like. One of the many things I liked about New York was that people don't give a fuck, about all the labels as you're describing them, right? It's more like, okay, what have you done? What are you doing? Can we meet? Can we talk? What can we do together?
Mm-hmm.
That's where all the focus is. A lot of the times I felt.
Right. No, I think so. And it's also the energy here, and it's tolerant. Like it can tolerate many diverse aspects of expressions for many, many years. It just has been open and welcoming and fresh ideas. And so in a way, it is a competitive environment, but I think it's a very healthy environment, because if you aim high, you could get there if you work hard. It's kind of makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel, so a couple questions then, do you feel that the city has changed? I mean, obviously it has changed since that time, but I wonder if sometimes the city's become too financially, what's the word? It's too expensive. I think, and especially in Manhattan proper, and maybe it no longer supports the kind of artist vitality and the life and that kind of lifestyle and that culture and that community, because it's so expensive.
Well, what happened as a result of pandemic is that's kind of reversing it,
Really.
because you can see the office property rent became lower, the rent has become lower, and many more younger people coming back to Manhattan to rent or buy properties. And this is actually, it's a reset. It's one of the things that pandemic has done is people left in some offices, people are not working in there, the financial institution might have relocated. So there's a danger, but I've seen uh, tide change in New York over the ages. Of, for example, when I graduated from Cooper Union, that's like around the time when New York City literally went bankrupt.
Right, right.
So if you think of financial crisis is the worst time to graduate to try to get a job, it's like, oh my God.
And to
I've
start your own
seen
office.
Yeah, and then you see that, and then you've gone through financial crisis. We have seen 9/11. And I live in Tribeca. At 9/11, we had to escape, and the neighborhood was shut down. It was like a war zone, and everybody said no one's going to come back, and everybody's going to not to want to live there anymore, and real estate price is going to come down. All that's, but nothing like that. Everybody's back. It's thriving. It's one of the most desirable communities here. So New York has a very interesting way of resetting itself from time to time, and so in a way, yes, the times of times in which we see now is, I think, also a time of reset, in which I think it's opportunity for artists to occupy more spaces and more. I think there's smarter younger offices renting more desirable properties now, and with much less price, and all that clever things are happening as a new type of business is coming. So there is this, it was complete time of reset, and at the same time, as you say, it probably wasn't sustainable if
Mm-hmm.
kept going the way we did pre-pandemic in terms of completely commercially focused.
Right.
It's a greed-based economy. It was not sustainable.
Yeah, the greed-based economy.
Yeah.
Well, if what you're saying is true, then that's, I think, one of the silver linings. And shoot, maybe we should move back to.
I was just thinking maybe we should move back to New York.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
don't want
Yeah.
to use the word silver lining just because so many people got sick and
Of
so
course.
many people died, and it is like virtually another war zone we are living through, and we can't forget that
Yeah.
how many people died as a result. And so I don't want to say that as if some part of us benefited from the situation, but it's so I rather like to use the word reset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. You know, I do wonder, and it's not a question we've asked many times, but you've been in New York City for almost your entire life. What was 9/11 like? I don't want to go backwards in time and talk about that one event too much, but I am curious as a person who lived in New York City, as a person who wasn't there when it happened, as a person who was too young to understand what it meant, and also as an architect. I mean, what was it like to be in the city, to be living and working? I assume you were living in Manhattan. I don't know, but living and working in Manhattan, then have those two towers, which were iconic, just go down.
Well, it's we're still traumatized. I can't even go down to the museum
Really?
because we live right above it on Tribeca, on the same street. So the morning of 9/11, my husband was coming back from gym. He witnessed the plane hit the tower. He came up, and you won't believe what I saw. And we have a roof. So we have a roof. It's directly north of the towers, and we saw the big hole. And we were on the roof when we watched the second plane come and hit it.
Okay.
And even without hearing anything, we kind of knew immediately it's a terrorist attack. So we witnessed it, and then we saw all the fire engines going there, and then realized oh my God, these firemen, they may not come back. A tiny little fire engine tried to save people, and then our office is just like in between the towers and our home, and it was morning, so we called the office and told everybody who's already there to shut down the window, lock the door, get out of the office, and go north, and don't even look back south.
Wow.
And of course, the people who work for us looked south, and they saw people falling off the windows. And we are completely traumatized by it. And luckily we are north of it, so the wind was all going south. That's one of the reasons, trying to tell everybody. And everybody is running up the street, and some of us went down offering water and everything, and people without shoes, and it was like chaotic. And because I'm in the north end of Tribeca, where houses was shut down completely, from south of it was like you can't enter. And eventually we had to leave for a couple weeks, and we couldn't even open an office for a couple months.
Wow.
I was going to ask, how long? I mean, I know the 9/11 projects that happened afterwards. The building of this, was it 7 towers and the park and the museum, and the $1 billion transit hub. That all took a long time to happen. But was there a sense of like how many years or how long did it take for New Yorkers to kind of go through the healing process of, I don't want to say moving on, because it sounds like you're forgetting what happened, but to kind of move past sort of what happened? Was it like, did it take 5 years? Did it take a decade?
By 5 years we saw the results, and I think, as I said, we're still traumatized about it. So but I think reconstruction, regenerating, and neighbors, basically, they all stayed, and the businesses stayed and shut down, and we came back. There's incredible resilience in the city that can keep going. And then listen, someone like Larry Silverstein, who owned the tower, he's a developer who ended up rebuilding everything. So that's like amazing resilience for
Yeah.
if you're thinking about, yeah, it could just send people beyond bankruptcy and beyond trauma. I mean, trauma, we can never get over it. And then we think about it each year, but it gradually, yeah. I mean, I think it's better than ever before now. Yeah, by decade, I think we are okay.
Sometimes I forget that was like 20 years ago. That's kind of difficult to believe.
Oh, wow.
It feels like only 8 years ago, but it was 10. Okay, so then going, I guess, further back. So you have your office, right? You've started your office, and sort of back to the question that Marina asked about, the challenges of starting a practice at that time. I mean, was it difficult? Did you find projects right off the bat? How did that work?
Oh, so that's when the clueless thing comes up. I can't believe what I did. I had a Cooper Union thesis on called Places of Transaction, in which my thesis is about the marketplace. And I had this prototype of marketplace, which kind of modular and proliferates. And at that time, there's a very fashionable shop called Henry Bendel's on 57th Street. And it has a very progressive idea of street of shops. So this recreated urban environment. It's not like a mall. And then each one, it's kind of a pop-up shop of different designers. It's very progressive ideas. And I like this idea as a market. So I made an appointment with the president of Henry Bendel's and he showed my thesis, like what I was thinking. So I said, this is my thesis about places transaction. It might have some resonance with your spatial concept. And she looked at it. She says, okay, I think I have a project for you. And she gave me a tiny little shop to design, 165 square feet. And she says, I'm just inviting a new Japanese designer to open a shop for us. And it was Comme des Garçons.
Oh, wow.
So this was Ray Kawakubo's first shop. That was basically my the full size of my thesis project.
Okay.
That's incredible.
So
that is like every student's dream, is to take their thesis, present it somewhere, and be like, design it for this new fashion label.
Well, I tell my students, you should do that.
Yeah.
You never know, really, because people are looking for ideas. And then I think at that time she was like at the loss as to what to do, and she saw this project. Oh, that's perfect. I need it like a day after tomorrow. So we hire you and design and build it.
So how did you even get that appointment?
I called. I just called. She took, I don't know. She was very supportive of my career until she died. It was very, very sweet. And then story goes that there's a shop in New York which was very famous used to be Charivari, which is run by a mom and two kids, sister and brother. They are the ones who had all sorts of designers, from Jean-Paul Gaultier to Michael Kors, and they would just assemble the lines. And that family has seen this shop, and they carry Yohji Yamamoto, Comme des Garçons. And then they commissioned to me a number of their shops in New York, and that's how I started.
Wow, that's not a bad start. I mean, so when you started the practice, did you have particular interest in a type of architecture that you wanted to do, or were you game to take on, anything?
Yeah, I was game to take on anything, but then because my thesis of a places transaction idea of a places where people and merchandise and society interacts, that kind of was theoretical interest for me, like how, and a whole idea of trades and transitions and how goods move It's
Mm-hmm.
and how it's presented, like, and how that particular economic cycle works in terms of transactions. So it was interested in stock markets to farmers markets to store idea of a stores. And a store is an ancient idea, really, from Greeks to Romans, and that's like where social human actions took place as well as economic transactions. So that was kind of so theoretically I was interested in that space,
Mm-hmm.
but I just never thought that that's how I started my practice, but that's what happened.
But that's
That's
pretty cool,
great.
though. I think that thesis, we're talking about undergraduate thesis, right, is incredibly important for most architects. That's like a period of everyone's lives that we remember fondly, maybe, or not so fondly, depending on how it all went. But the transition from that level of a theory to then practicing is a big jump in a lot of ways. And a lot of times, in fact, I would say the vast majority of the times, the theoretical thinking that happens in school doesn't take place in practice. Like, it's almost like a lot of architects abandon it and forget it. And I understand, because there's a lot of real life things you have to deal with. You have budgets, you have schedules, you have value engineering, you have clients, all those things. But so I guess that's a long way of asking a question is, it sounds like you were able to continue some of your more intellectual thinking through into the practice. And have you been able to continue that level of thought throughout all of your work, do you feel?
Practically, yeah, because that's I'm a half academic and half practitioner, and then if a project doesn't interest me at that level, it's really difficult to engage, really.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but always a challenge is to find that thread of intellectual curiosity in theoretical interest. Nearly every project has that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the challenge for an architect is to excavate it and discover that. And then if you really focus on that, then I think architecturally one can make a project which can have a conceptual basis and which can possibly make statement of our time. So it's really attitude, really. And then also when I teach students, I tell them, and probably know French symbolism lists, and Apollinaire especially says that what's most fantastic is closest to reality. So when you align reality closer to your imagination and fantasy, it truly becomes fantastic, because alignment with reality is what makes it spectacular. It's not the distance between your dream and reality. When you get it closer, then it becomes something.
Closer, closer because you are executing a real thing, but also closer in the sense that, like, you used the word excavating, which I thought was interesting, as opposed to pulling something from a random place in the imagination and then plopping it down. So you see the part of the process and the thinking about what the core concept or the idea, the thinking of the project as being a result of an excavation of something that's kind of already there.
Yeah, that's mining. Yeah, mining efforts. I mean, human civilization is quite amazing, and then whatever it has done in the past and any building typologies, there's a really deep history to it. And then somebody thought about it carefully, how things are made and where things are and how it came about, and excavating those histories and trajectory of how things came about and where it should go. That's probably one of the more exciting part of our discipline, really.
You mentioned also that this is the result of having kind of an attitude toward architecture and probably toward life too, but toward architecture. Is it challenging though to continue that approach with more or less every project when there are a lot of external pressures? Or another way to ask the question is like, what is the design process for you? Is it consistent from one thing to the next?
No, because that's what's so fun about architecture. There's not a single project I like. I mean, there are other professions that work is repetitious over and over, whereas ours is not really. Every single project has different premise, the program, the client, the climate, the site, and so we are very lucky, and I think I'm really grateful that we are working in which every project is fresh and you can't, and then also a challenge is you can't repeat it. Even if you try to repeat it, it's not possible. So you have to get back to zero again and then rethink of it. And even if you start to force what you thought you knew before, it just doesn't work. At least for me.
Yeah. I'm kind of on the same page with that line of thinking, and it's weird how it works that when you start to force something, you get. I mean, at least for us, like you get stuck. You can feel like, well, I'm not getting anywhere, and it's probably because you're forcing something. Is it though? Is it challenging to communicate this approach or take on architecture to clients? Because I mean, you have a reputation now, so I presume clients come to you, but still most people think of architecture in a very shallow way, right? But your description of it is there's a lot of research, there's a lot of thinking. Is it difficult to communicate this to non-architects or to convince them that this is a good way to do it?
One of the things is that we're lucky that the type of clients we have are extremely creative and extremely intelligent and extremely informed. And for every client, it's enormous amount of investment financially and also time-wise too. And so they have to appreciate the value that we bring. And so if we don't bring that value, it could be just anything, but they do not want that. So how do you bring the value to what you're building? And what is a legacy anybody is creating, for example, for institutional buildings, and then for individual lifestyles, there's always something about their lives which becomes very exciting when it's spatialized, when we become the architectural expression, which has a fresh relationship to site and so forth. So I think I actually perhaps we might undervalue the intelligence of lay people. I think they are like innately, they know if you show something bad and ugly, they know right away.
Yeah, that's true.
So if you show something really thought out, they get it just intuitively. There's certain human intelligence about this they're very common.
I imagine also that part of, like you said, offering the client value, demonstrating that value, but giving them something, right, that is going to be worth a lot of money, is taking them through the process. So, I mean, I'm also wondering, I guess this is getting to like how you work with clients, but I kind of feel like that different offices approach this problem differently. Like some offices are quite shielded and they have like the black curtain, right? And they only show very select things. And others are more open and it's a process to go through with a client. But I've kind of found that a lot of clients are if they're going to hire an architect and they understand the value of design, they kind of want to see what happens. They want to see the inner workings. They want to learn design sort of vicariously and see how it evolves.
Yeah, I think so. I luckily I think all my clients have been that way, and practically speaking, we make a lot of models and iterational models that seem to communicate better sometimes than plans. And of course, plans we draw and going back and forth and elevations, renderings, but showing iteration in the models seem to gain more quick understanding of how we are working through in a three-dimensional way. So it's a process, but it's also mutual education, because we are learning about the program, learning about the client, and then they're learning about us. So it's a series of communications that we need to keep up in order to make a project successful.
What kind of models do you guys typically create and show? Are they, white foam core things? Are they 3D printed? Are they detailed?
All of the above, except we don't do foam models. No.
Oh, the blue foam?
No.
The blue foam is very popular amongst certain offices.
We don't like it. We think it's toxic. It's too
That's true.
Cartoony. So we try to do wood or paper models, and then simple massing models.
So in-house, built by hand in a lot of cases.
Yeah. A lot of cases.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Which is also for designers. Especially, we are so much tethered to computers, and with digital drawings and rendering, it's very deceptive. And then with hand building models, one is experiencing proportions, and one can discover a lot of problems by just quickly working it through. And also it just takes them off the screens, which is very healthy.
So was there a first project that you did and with your office where you felt that this was it was the one that started to kind of encapsulate everything that you felt you wanted to create as a designer? That one that was a benchmark in a way?
Not really. I think our office. It's always been cumulative. Like, it's just not a singular project, but it's many different types of project. And one project has one attribute which is important in certain aspects. More public project, lower budget, but it has a iconic presence, as opposed to more high-end project in which it's incredible. We just got nailed in the sighting, in the volume, and everything. So it's very different. So I don't think we have such a singular project which nailed down everything all at once.
Is there a particular types of project that you personally enjoy doing more than others?
That's the same answer, because I like to do residential projects. I like to do institutional projects. I like to do educational projects also, because they have very different challenges, and also for me and for office, it gives you diversity. If you just narrow down one thing, it can be repetitious. It doesn't challenge you enough. And then you're just jumping around different scale, different sites, different programs. It actually brings you back with a new perspective to another project. So it seems to have a healthy relationship of dialogue among a family of projects.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
I like that, and I kind of, in the broader scope, I agree with that as well. Yeah, because I think I don't want to say that if you're an architect and you practice only one project type that you're not good. That's not what I'm saying for sure. But there's a kind of a freshness when you get to see a bunch of different stuff and work on a bunch of different things. I feel like with muscles, you're looser, you're more flexible in a certain way.
Oh yeah, right, exactly. It's more stretching exercises.
Right. Yeah.
Weightlifting.
Yeah, just powerlifting, just bench presses all day. Yeah. So you're interested in a lot of different things and a lot of different project types. You've done a lot of different project types, but is there something that you understand as being consistent between all the different projects and their work? And if there is that thing, perhaps it's what's led to your success in a way, is what I'm wondering. Is there something that's consistent?
Well, as a person, I like simplicity. I like clarity. I mean, and then also all the architectural project, I want everything to be aligned, both mentally, philosophically, but also in terms of execution. Everything just needs to be in relationship with each other, and it's within alignment, and that's hugely important. It's a very abstract idea, but it creates a spatial balance and harmony, which creates, how do I say, it's just I cannot deal with misaligned elements.
But it's interesting you say, you say alignment, but not just in terms of, the geometries, the reveals, and the whatever else, the lines, and the actual building aligning. There's that, but you also mentioned that you mean more conceptually. What does that mean?
Well, alignment with the site, the views, the climate, and really if one is in alignment with all the factors, it's ecological. It naturally becomes ecological and naturally becomes sustainable. You don't even have to use those words. So in alignment with all sorts of factors and programs, and so it just gives you a many different quotient to consider alignment, and that's kind of interesting, and then also local culture, alignment with type of economy, it exists on site. So yeah, so some alignment may be more of a high-end aspiration, some alignment may have to be aligned with the public sector, some with much more underserved communities, different circumstances. So that's interesting approach and important, I think. If I get really, it drives me crazy if things get misaligned.
That's a great word, though, alignment. And actually, it occurred to me that that's very different from the word force, which I think you used, right? That's the opposite, actually, in a way.
Right, yeah. When you're forced upon, you're imposed upon. And instead, you actually seek the different relationship. That's what it is. Alignment is really connecting and then creating different relationship within each other. So there's a dialogue between different elements, and then one thing informs other things.
The other thing that we were wondering is that you were born in Japan and moved to the States at a fairly young age. And this is something that Marina can relate to better than me because I'm not an expat. Really? I was born in the States. I'm like a third generation person. But was there a time when you started to feel that the United States, or maybe more specifically New York City, was your home as opposed to Japan? Or was there a point in time when you started to identify more as a New Yorker or as an American or less of a Japanese person?
So I think we live in city-states. I don't think we identify as nations, as where we come from. So okay. When people ask, like, my real home really is Japan. Now it's Tokyo. Kobe, we left long time ago. So my family lived in Tokyo for nearly half a century. So that's where we used to go back to. And then my real home is New York. And so I really don't think in terms of nation divide, but more in terms of cities. And then, yeah.
No, that's fair, especially if we're talking about America versus New York.
It's interesting. It's interesting too. We went to Japan for the first time a few years ago, and
that was like 5 years ago. Now
it's 2 years ago, and we went to Tokyo, and it was very interesting because at the time when we went to Japan, we were living in New York, and as soon as we arrived in Tokyo, it felt familiar. It felt almost like home, and we already knew the place, even if it was the first time. And I don't know if you can relate, if you feel like these two places have a lot in common, but it was really apparent to us when we visited Tokyo. And it kind of like blew my mind away in a sense, because I was like, we're in a completely different continent, a completely different culture. and heritage, but the feeling of the place feels similar to one that's somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, I think it's metropolis.
Yeah.
It's two greatest metropolis, which has a very similar energy, and both of them are incredibly frenetic.
Yeah.
And then a lot of energy and street life and all that. So yeah, it's different culture, of course, and the density is there in both places. So yeah, I totally understand.
Yeah, there's a certain life to them, a
Yeah.
buzz. Do you feel though that your upbringing in Japan shaped, your outlook on life and also your approach to architecture? Like, is that do you feel that that's like a central part to how you approach things?
I can't help it.
Okay.
I was born and brought up there in a certain way by my family, and like everybody else, that forms. It's a very formative period when you grow up. So of course your value systems, your manners, and how you behave, how you think about even beyond architecture. How do you work with human relationship? That's it. That's my DNA is embedded in that really, so that I can't escape it. But I don't consciously make it a part of my work or aesthetics, but it comes through naturally because you absorb growing up and going through it. It's just like it's so obvious that I'm Asian, I'm woman, I'm Japanese. So is there anything else I have to do to impose that to other people?
Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, it's the question of like identity and the work is an interesting one for us, and I do appreciate what you said earlier about like you approach the work. And the work tells you what it wants to be in a certain sense, and that's the nature of it. And as opposed to, or when you're starting your office, you're just out there doing the thing. You're doing it, as opposed to thinking maybe more consciously and more often or all the time. I am this label. I am that label. Therefore, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a kind of almost an elegance to kind of just going through life and doing work in the way that you're describing, and not being overly consumed by basically, again, the labels that you said.
Well, that's very elegant, but I'm just being selfish. I do what I want, what I like.
Yeah, I can see that too, but I think, I do feel like sometimes people focus way too heavily on all of these labels, and it becomes I don't know, it starts to kind of taint the work itself in some way, but maybe that's a different conversation. So you've had your practice for some time, and you've done a variety of work. Was it difficult to take on different types of projects, to get different types of projects? Did they just come across your table?
No, a lot of institutional projects we won by competitions.
Oh wow.
So we were really active in the public projects in the city, institutional projects we have done. It's all competition based, and sometimes even residential works in competitions. So yeah, that's basically what it is. So it doesn't easily come our way, but by participating in competitions, which means you choose what you want to do and you choose which competitions you want to be involved, because you know you can't win everything, and it's incredibly resource heavy, meaning it takes a lot of resources. So we choose very carefully which ones to participate. So so we are careful about how to do it. So it doesn't. Sometimes it comes our way, especially residential projects, and sometimes with repeat clients. But even with repeat clients, it's been institutionally, it's always been invited to competitions.
Right.
It doesn't come.
How many people are in your office currently? I don't mean physically because it's COVID, but I mean working in the office.
We just two of us now,
Okay.
but overall,
Yeah.
it's 10 to 12.
Okay.
Depends on, yeah, we have some part-time remote working people.
That's a good size. It's definitely not large. Is there an aspiration to have it be bigger? Or do you like
No,
that size? No.
I like this size.
Yeah.
This is just like a studio size, and I can
There.
keep an eye on every project, and everybody has access to me. I think that's just the right size.
How many projects do you have at one time typically?
I never count because some of them are under construction, some of them are
Sure.
starting, some of them are large scale planning, some of them are renovations. So it's in a very, so I just never count it, but I just making sure that work is distributed fairly among the staff. That's what I have to care about. That work enough. No one is overloaded. Enough work in sequences coming through. So,
Mm-hmm.
and because of COVID situation, we've been very careful about not expanding and being very careful in terms of workload. And then because everybody's on remote work, working out of home.
Yeah.
And from time to time, we come into the office. So distributing a workload and making sure that everybody is taken care of situation. I think I'm more focused on that than counting how many projects. But
Sure, sure. That's what happens when you have employees. On the subject of competitions, they sometimes get a bad rap because there's the idea that competitions, they do take a lot of resources, as you said, and they are a lot of times not, in the sense, because of that, not fair to architects and their offices, because basically they're doing a lot of more or less free labor, a lot of times just free, up front. Is there any hesitation with doing competitions because of that? I mean,
that's why I said I choose very carefully.
well,
And then some of them, a lot of them are requests for qualifications, in which it's not hard to put that together. And when it goes into competitions, so we usually do project in which unless they pay for you to enter into a competition with limited competitors, it's never enough, but it still is fairer than others.
Yeah.
So, and then but we usually participate in a request for qualification and request for proposal and interview process, that type of situations. We do participate sometimes in open competition because it's kind of fun sometimes. And despite my good judgment, it's exciting. It's kind of good exercise for office to do that once in a while, just participating in them.
Right. For larger, like, institutional works, were you guys often pair with another architect as a local, with the architect of record? Or are you guys able to do a lot of that in-house, be the architect?
Yeah, no, I think we get paired. For example, Novartis project, which is very large, and Canon was the associated project.
Right.
Yeah, associate architect of a project. But all the other institutional projects, we have done everything on our own. And I use master plan, we are with Grimshaw.
Gotcha.
So yeah. So this, and I think it's good if you have a team that you can actually put together to go after larger projects, that we are part of it.
Oh, so you would actually pair with another office for the competition itself?
Have we done that? Oh yes, some international competitions, like European competitions, we have access to. We have people who left my office and have offices in Europe, for example, or Hong Kong, or California. So it's very nice to pair together with those colleagues to enter into competitions elsewhere.
Is there a type of project that you haven't done yet that you want to?
Well, that's hard because it's typology is also changing quite a bit. Meaning, like, and for a long time I wanted to do a concert hall and theaters, but we are coming up with a proposal for portable concert hall, which I have a nonprofit with a couple other partners, because we realize that it's quite wasteful, meaning that it's very expensive to build, and realize that it's not necessarily revenue producing, and unless they sell concerts with very expensive tickets. And so we thought it's actually much better to do temporary mobile portable paradigm. So we're developing that. So that's actually one typology I wanted to do for a long time, but we just switched the gears completely to make it more accessible to remote communities, and it could even travel with orchestra, and then it's less expensive, and it's shareable. So it's kind of coming up with a new typology. So as a result of it, I'm really more interested now to question building typologies, to think that can some of it become more temporary and reusable, movable, instead of just keep building static buildings that can become obsolete. So that's the way I'm thinking right now.
That's interesting. And there's something, so where in the process are you for that? When can we look forward to seeing this movable?
We have done a full-size mock-up.
Oh, wow.
And in acoustic testing, we're collaborating with Arab Acoustics. And then we are now coming up with a new technology, not using any steel structures, but using air beam, with a collaboration with a Japanese manufacturer. So everything is just air and membrane. And I think that's kind of interesting. So we are now we came up with two possibilities, and we are going into prototype building right now. So by the end of the year, I think we can come up with something.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. We'll have to look forward to that for sure. I was going to ask how it works, but this was in what do they call it? A pneumatic structure.
It's not really a pneumatic structure. Air beam, once you put on the air, it stays there for a while.
Okay.
So it's not inflatable.
Right. Okay.
You have to keep pumping air all the time. And that's why there's issues of temporality, which I think I like this idea that when there's a hurricane comes, you just fold up and leave.
Okay. I mean, there's something kind of interesting and fitting to to an architecture that is temporary and it's able to be mobile and more agile. There's something fitting with the way society is evolving naturally, especially with. It could even tie this to the digital mobile devices and how everything's being networked but remote, and then moving from here to there. There's something appropriate about it, it seems.
Right. I think I just taught a studio at GSD on temporary and ephemeral structures because it's a new brief for us, just to think of how can we be more agile and adaptable and flexible, resilient in architecture, where it's supposed to be it takes a long time to design and build. And you see some building typologies like office towers. I don't know how it probably can be renovated to another use, but type might become obsolete very quickly. And then how is it? Is there something wrong about the fact that we're creating building types which is not adaptable to rapid changes in life and society and public health issues?
This kind of thesis, do you think that is perhaps one of the biggest challenges for current and future for the current and future architecture as a profession, and the thing itself, the object itself, is wrestling with this tension between historically being a static, very heavy, fixed object versus the temporal nature of society, which seems to be increasing. The pace at which things change seems to be increasing and increasing.
Right. And then at the same time, we cannot become a consumer object. It cannot be a disposable.
Right.
So I think the biggest asset of architecture and building, it has been that it's not a consumer object.
Huh.
That the fact that it lasts for a long time, one can keep reusing it, and which is a huge attribute, I think. And then when you think of temporary structures, you think of it as disposable. And I think that's the mindset which needs to change.
Mhm.
So it has to be either shareable or reusable, recyclable, things like that. And if you think about something like Olympics or Expo is one big expensive event in which all the buildings becomes like not used and useless. And how can we go about doing that? So I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities for us to think through that whole issue.
Yes. And the Olympics specifically are hugely wasteful a lot of times. I one of the most vivid trips that I remember was I went to the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and massive, obviously like the Bird's Nest by Herzog and de Meuron, and the Aqua swimming facility by Hadid. But these are massive structures, a massive park. In terms of master plan, they made the thing too big. The park's too big. It was just giant swaths of concrete. And, they're more or less just ghost towns now. They just sit there empty.
I'm curious about your teaching currently, and you've been teaching for quite a few years. I'm curious, how did that get started for you? How did you always feel like you wanted to teach architecture, that you had something to share with students, or that you needed to stay current and stay, with engaged with school and students as you are in the different types of projects you're working on, to kind of stay challenged and stimulated? Like, how did that come about for you?
So I think it started out by being invited by John Haydock to teach at Cooper Union. And John Haydock also had always told us that teaching is a birthright of architect and don't give it up. And by saying that, there's certain societal responsibilities. He also called it social contract, in which we are given opportunity to build for the society, but in turn we have to make a contribution to educate the next generation. And so because of this, and a lot of people may not say that out loud so clearly, but more than any other professions, I think architects, there's so many people teaching in one capacity, or rather all over. I think by and large, I have never made a statistic things, but you can tell like a lot of people practicing are actually teaching, and some of them may teach just a seminar or workshop, but a lot of architects are involved in teaching activities, because I think deeply we feel that, and if we don't keep transmitting our knowledge to next generations, this is not the type of knowledge or pedagogy that can be passed down by textbooks.
For sure.
So by studio teaching and by one-to-one teaching or direct contact with the students, and now it's impossible with remote, but we are still in contact with the students. So we are really, that's the only way we can probably give a live knowledge to the next generation with many, many different factors. So it's a joyful obligation, because it's kind of fun to teach.
Yeah.
But also, I think my experience at undergraduate at Cooper Union was so much fun. It was like a most amazing creative period, and you think that you want a next generation or next generations at my age, because there's several generations, to experience that joy of learning. and then to discovering oneself, and then figuring out what is architecture is like for him or herself. Uh, so it gives you enormous amount of energy uh, to get back, because I learn as much from students as I'm teaching. So
Right.
there's much more mutual relationship in terms of teaching, and I think it's something somebody should write about it. The fact of relationship of architecture profession and teaching, which I think we are more active than anyone else that I can think about.
There certainly is a very strong sense of community.
Yeah.
Within the profession generally, that's true. But also, if we start to consider what percentage of people are teaching or have interest in it or have done it in some degree, a very, very strong sense of community
and sharing.
And sharing, yeah. I like the idea, though, that's an obligation. That's pretty, it's almost radical in a sense, because like you said, not many people would say that out loud. I think in part because, we don't necessarily make a lot of money. So the idea that we still owe society something is kind of...
But we realize that unless we try, our profession is quite fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And because we, as you said, we don't make much money, and then some other construction business can completely take over what we do. So unless we instill in the next generation value of what we do and how we do it and how we keep surviving and then thriving, it's not easy. We could be written off very easily by anybody with a smart economist as unsustainable, unnecessary profession.
Right. That's a really, really good point. That the use of the word fragile. That's actually a pretty good description of the profession, because it is one of its strengths, and one of the reasons why it's I think really appealing and interesting is that it is fragile, or it is always struggling to be defined, and it is agile. It's able to evolve, but as a result, it makes it susceptible to anyone who has the background that you mentioned, and they have a rule book and percentages and numbers and things that are very clearly understandable, and quantifiable, could easily erode the more elusive things that we do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Going quickly back to the idea of temporary structures, I was wondering if you used to see like an open framework architecture, or an architecture that's more willing to accept different types of programs, is that like a potential solution to this issue? Or does architecture become generic at some point?
No, I think it's more ideal is like a Fun Palace by Cedric Price.
Gotcha.
And that's really interesting, because it's open frame, adaptable, different program, but it has architectural presence about it. It doesn't become generic.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, more different programs gets entered into, more specific it becomes. It just has a capacity to transform itself spatially transforming into something else, but it still has the identity of architecture. That's, to me, is a most brilliant model.
And I'm trying to remember back now to my studies, but an identity of architecture, because obviously there's a physical presence to it, but also it seems like with a lot of these architectures that are, let's say, transformative or have a system to it, that there's embedded within it some kind of relationship between the various components and things that are allowed to take place. So in other words, it's not just a nude, open, anything goes kind of platform, but there's an inherent character in the way in which it allows things to interact.
I think it just makes it more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's idea of a Fun Palace is very, very dynamic. And then also I think we are looking at eras from Japanese metabolism to super studio to archigram, in which architecture was really more infrastructure related and then more adaptable and then dynamic entities. And then it really had identity of itself as architecture. It became more of a theoretical, more image-based manifesto, but maybe we came to time in which we have to rethink those initiatives
Right.
as something which can be realizable.
Yeah. And again, it does feel appropriate. And maybe with COVID, that it has hit a reset and there's an opportunity to think about these things in a more serious way. I had a question about your work because I think what's interesting speaking with you today is that there's clearly a very strong philosophical presence to the process and your thinking. And again, I think a lot of architects maybe start with that, or they have that somewhere embedded within them from a lot of times from school. But there strikes me as there's a difference between being able to think abstractly at that level successfully. There's a difference between that versus actually executing a building that just physically, aesthetically is good, it's well constructed, and it's beautiful, and the details make sense. It's just as a pure aesthetic work of sculpture. And it seems like in your work, the success comes because you're able to do both, right? So I don't know if I have a question, I suppose. I guess my question is like, how did you develop the skills to execute buildings as well as you do? Because that I think is a different skill set a lot of times from being able to think abstractly.
It's not that much different because
Really?
no, because it's I think perhaps it may be wrong that those are two different skill sets because it really relates how buildings are built and who's building it. And then if you have a conceptual strength, the way things build starts to make sense because you have a choice of what materials and how things are built. And then the detailing, they establish a relationship with each other. It's not that you can apply conceptual work into a built work. And for example, like a structure is like a bone of a body. So the bone as a skeleton works in one way. Is your building exoskeletal? Is it endoskeletal? And that's really conceptual idea. And then it's your structure is more pixelated, like it's very many thin members opposed to large members, and that's spatially related to the conceptual idea and expression of architecture. So I think one has to be able to navigate between those areas, and one of the biggest legacies of modern architecture, especially lessons I call lessons from Mies van der Rohe, is there's really clear relationship between concept and details in which one element comes together and then whole, and one actually makes a rational logic as to how things come together. So in terms of construction process, there is a logic to it. There's a rational logic, and there's even sequential logic. And in our time in which digital fabrications are rapidly taking place, we kind of have to know more about how things are put together because things are going so much faster. And then that actually makes a lot of sense in terms of budget and time and facility of how you can actually pull buildings together. And I think it's very interesting subject matter, what material to use, where it's made, and how it's going to have within the economic cycles, and how it's placed in your project. It opens up a completely different set of issues, of course, but it gives you so many other set of things to think about, which is fascinating.
Yeah. I think Well, I feel like this is one of the professions where complacency is really, really dangerous because things are evolving, whether it be construction technology, or even just people and culture and society and cities themselves, like evolving always at a faster and faster pace. I mean, I like your response that you feel that the what I was proposing as being two separate things, that you feel them as being very much integrated and of one line of process, and they're not disjointed in any way.
Well, I think, well, we can't escape from that.
Yeah, sure. No, that's true. But I guess maybe another way to talk about it is, like your work, there's the big gestures behind the work, but also, and now we're talking just in terms of form, I suppose, and the building itself. There are small details and small moves that are an expression of some kind of idea. And so so the idea is being carried through at the large scale, let's say the master plan, then the building massing, then the specific window sizes, and then the details and the trim, and all those things are in there. But it feels to me that a lot of architects, maybe today, who are even very successful ones, who are known for having conceptual material that powers their designs, it feels like to me a lot of times their work stops at the big massing gesture, and they aren't able to get past that and get down to executing the details in a way that is convincing. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And I've always kind of felt that, I've always wondered, like, what is that difference between buildings that seem to be stuck at the single gesture, brushstroke level of execution, versus work like yours, which seems to go further into the specificity of specific corners of the building and things like this.
So I think I'm probably very old-fashioned.
Okay.
And then also size of our office is critical, because then we can really look at it in that way. And sometimes we are not in a need to turn out one building after the other by economic pressures of larger offices, perhaps. And I think there's different types of architecture, and I think that fulfills a role of its own. If it's kind of more of an iconic, and then it has much more presence in urban scale, it has different impact, different roles it plays. So that's a very different game, and I happen not to play that game by choice. And then I think there's many different ways to do architecture, and I think it's very specific. I think from architect's office to architect's office about the strategy of approaching craft of architecture.
There's room for everybody.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
Yeah. If that's not the case, then we're in trouble as a profession.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to talk a little bit about your nonprofit, VisionArc.
That's not a nonprofit.
Oh, not a nonprofit.
Is the portable concert hall. So.
Oh, right. My bad. Yeah. So, well, it'd be nice to talk about VisionArc. What is it? What does it do? When did it start? Why did you start it?
Oh, I think we started nearly 10 years ago, but it's a small research wing. And then it's like a bit of a think tank in which we'll take on, we got a commission in the very beginning for government of Singapore to envision now, like what happened to 2050. So it's like a very, very big thing. We thought that's very interesting to think about larger issues. And it came about because I've been active at World Economic Forum for many years, no longer, but in the Global Agenda Council, in which we deal with global energy crisis, migration issues, climate change, all these untenable large issues, and realize that very few architects are on the table in discussion with other leaders. And I really thought that architecture is a profession and a discipline in which it's we assemble many different disciplines together and ideas together and relate to each other. It's a by and large it's a team discipline, and we have check and balances. And I keep saying very, very few buildings built actually fails or fall down. It's very rare because we have amazing layers of dialogue and check and balances that's going on, collaboration going on to make sure it's standing up, it functions well most of the time. But compared to other things, I just make an argument like financial systems keep collapsing all the time. And how can you make this happen? Public health system is collapsing, and realize that architecture has this incredible resilient systems, structures built into it, in which many different sectors can figure it out. And so this research wing, there's a couple of things. One is my focus has been material research, but then architects going beyond just glass, concrete, and steel. We are looking at elements of agriculture, elements of food chain, elements of a trade, transportation, energy. Of course, climate change is always so. Material we are dealing with has exponentially expanded. In fact, we already deal with all these materials that has impact on larger global issues. And we're already processing it together in a way we can connect different silos. So we thought that this particular research think tank, the role is focused on ecological environmental issues. The role is connecting different isolated silos to create more resiliency in thinking through this process. So that's actually how it started.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. Is VisionArc, like, what is its relationship to your office? Is it within the office? Is it a totally separate thing? Oh, it's within the office.
Yeah, it's within an office, and one of the persons who's actually here with me is the director of it. And we often use that wing to do what we expand our programming issues, and which is very useful because we're given programming, but it's not enough to really think of square footages and functions, but we think of what is this role, how does it work within, if it's educational institution, a campus, if it's a library, what happens to people who work in it, what kind of community it makes, and then making a workshop to really figure it out. It's really helpful for this particular process of thinking, especially when we're doing larger, very complex institutional systems. And then sometimes we have done research on water, and we have done research for in the state of Maine for the future of alternative energy using wind power, what happens. And then we have done some miniature even for government in Bilbao, a future of a small cities next to Bilbao, what happens to it. So in a sense, assignment we are given mostly a lot of times is planning, but with really complex entities. And we are able to put it together and probably come up with options which are a little bit less solution oriented, but more of identifying problems within that. And then we can actually come up with solutions. So that's another thing is we're often given problem to solve it. For example, I always say engineers are very good at doing it. They're given problem, they come up with solutions. But architects' role is probably identifying problems before coming up with solutions. Because if we don't identify the right problems, we can never come up with the right solutions. And I think that's actually societal problem. We are always identifying wrong problems. Like, how do we deal with it? So I think that's really, it's very abstract, but it's kind of great mental training, and also for us to become not complacent all the time and everything given as if it's something given to us, but really we analyzing a whole situation and coming up with problematizing new areas, and then I think we can break the ground. And I don't use the word innovation often, but without identifying appropriate problems, you can never arrive at a new innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation is very different from seeking solutions.
I know that both of us agree with that sentiment completely, and I would say it's fundamental to what we do. And this idea of problem solving first starts with understanding the problem is core. It's absolutely core. Without it, you're relying on preconceptions, and you're stuck within whatever lane has been predetermined, in a sense, or preconceived, predetermined. But so Vision, I guess I'm wondering, why did you feel the need to break out VisionArc as a separate thing within the office? Why not have, because I mean, it has its own website, it's its own title, it's its own thing in a sense.
Well, one thing very clear, okay. It's actually outside of our liability issues. So Architect's office, the work we produce, physical, and it carries with it implication for liability insurance and so forth. But the research, if we include in that, it becomes quite complicated, and then there's no need to include the research in our portfolio, which accrues into our liability. And of course, we have to take on liability, we have to take on insurance. Yeah. So for business decisions is to make it research very clean and separate, so that it's not really part of the physical practice of architects, and it could be very independent. Right. Then it's it's more intellectual, so it's a very different type of liability than actual liability of a practicing office of architects. And so in a way, it made a lot of sense from practical point of view, and also it gives a bit of freedom. One can actually work as a business different fee structure one than normative architectural practice, in which we have this economy and we have this idea of figuring out, and also the time we spend on research sometimes can be longer or sometimes shorter than the normative practice.
Sure. So all the people that work, I guess, in or for with VisionArc are in your office, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's clear now. I mean, I think that's great. I think it's interesting, and I feel like also, I mean, as you mentioned, there are business advantages, but even just having a title for this other thing, even if it's in the same physical space and the same people, has got to have some kind of influence over how you think about or approach this. Like, there's because of that little bit of separation, or because of the separation, it gives you a little more freedom, maybe mentally, when you're doing VisionArc work, to not be tied to the restraints that come with, as you said, a normative project.
Right. Yeah. And also kind of, well, as you can imagine, architectural practice can be that, how do you say, although we have diverse projects, day-to-day work can be, quite monotonous. Yeah. But then having a very different types of work, and just having portable concert hall, which we call paraacustica, because it's related to idea of a music program started in Venezuela. So we have this funny pseudo Spanish title, and then VisionArc, and then people working on both, which actually gives a very different tone and a pace to the office, and just takes some people off guard a little bit and refreshes people's way of thinking.
Right. So everyone stays on their toes.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, we're coming up at the end. I just want to say thank you for joining us again. This was lovely. I had a great time speaking with you.
thank you for inviting me. I hope I was coherent. I just kept on talking.
No, it's fantastic.
Oh, it's great.
This was great.
Thanks again.
Dear listener, thanks for listening to this week's episode. We really appreciate it. If you like what we're doing, then support the show. If you like this episode, then support the show by leaving a review in the Apple Podcast app, right? That's a great way to support us. Elsewise, you can just send us your review via email at hello@secondstudiopod.com. We're on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube.
Yeah, or, it could also just be a little quick message on social media. Doesn't need to always be a review. Could just, be a little note if you want to tell us what you think. If you have any requests for topics or guests that I think would be good for the next episodes. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram most of the time. We also have a hotline, which is 213-222-6950. You can send a text message to that number. You can call, and it goes directly to voicemail. And that's pretty much all the ways you can reach us out. Right?
That's a lot of ways.
You can send a pigeon too if you want. You can find one.
An owl we support.
An eagle.
We only accept notes
the
via bald
eagle.
Get those pigeons out of here. Okay, well, I think that's it for this one. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again next week or sooner. Bye.
Bye-bye.